Pluto in Leo generation. Bearing in mind that Pluto was in Leo over halfway through 1939 to halfway through 1957, so 18 years worth of people were born with Pluto in Leo. Nevertheless, this is a generalization. This is the fabled group known as the baby boomers who have never had it so good. After the horrors of mid-20th century global war, there was a recognition of some of the mistakes of the past and an acknowledgement that old ways of being were no longer appropriate for the emerging technological age. Leo is one of the more creative signs of the zodiac, and with Pluto within its borders for nearly 20 years, the birth and transformation of various forms of creative endeavour became a trademark of this generation with this position. During the 2 decades of this transit, the development and use of nuclear energy became steadily more of a priority, both in terms of economic power and military might. To a considerable extent, the emergence of Pluto into Leo is one of the 2 main defining astrological aspects of the Second Global War, the second being the conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn and Uranus in Taurus over 1940 to 1942. These 2 factors, happening in fixed signs, added to the degree of resilience, perseverance and stubbornness of both sides in the conflict, and the early part of the 1940s is seen as one of the hardest periods of human history from an astrological perspective. Pluto in Leo may be seen at its most nihilistic during the dropping of atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945. Post-war, and as Pluto moved into the middle decade of Leo, so the rebuilding of society began in a more creative way, with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 1947 bringing with it both the United Nations and NATO, and the determination to never be seen to allow things to get so bad again. It also saw the emergence of a more belligerent development of nation-statehood, as perhaps indicated by the rise of both Israel and Communist China, as well as Indian independence. By this time, the nature and face of warfare had changed, and instead of worldwide naked aggression, as Pluto moved into the second half of Leo, a more recalcitrant and subversive energy became the norm and manifested in what is known as the Cold War. By the mid-1950s and Pluto's transit of the latter degrees of Leo, the developing technological boom coupled with the advancing age of imagination, as symbolised by the Uranus-Neptune square of 1953 to 57, gave the world an aspiring generation seeking both power and creativity in ways that would have seemed impossible and unimaginable to their parents in their childhood. This was a time when every household was promised a car and a television as representative of a new age, although it's also the time where the idea of the guru or celebrity became more pervasive in contemporary society. Remember, Leo is the sign of the zodiac most associated with children and rock stars. And through this period of Pluto's stay, the tendency for more playful and childlike attitudes towards life in many people was only matched by the emergence of egotistic and omnipotent domineering attitudes in others. The baby boom of the late 40s and early 50s is seen as a direct result of soldiers returning from war and wanting to create a new and beautiful life to replace the horrors and traumas of war. It is also at this time that civil rights and the rights of the child became more a manifest concern in the mass gestalt of humanity, as well as a much more tolerant attitude towards artistry and creativity. Of course, there was also the archetypal Plutonian backlash, as symbolised in the USA by McCarthyism, the suppression of the new in favour of the old, born out of fear of damage, but this did not really last too long in the face of Plutonian determination. At the individual level, in Leo, Pluto in Leo provides it a complete contrast to the more family-orientated side of Pluto in Cancer, with the breakdown of traditional family structures and the emergence of more alternative lifestyle choices, as perhaps best demonstrated by the emergence of rock and roll and other similar forms of youth cultures in the 1950s and early 60s. These are the people who became the hippies and permanently changed society's ideas towards love, sex, and the raising and education of all children, all classic Leonian archetypes. These are the people who opened doorways into the future that had been occluded to previous generations. Pluto in Leo people did not necessarily go through these doors, but they opened them for future generations to explore. This was the first generation to have a conscious awareness of their own destiny, being in their own hands, as opposed to the larger collective, more so than any other previous generation in history, demonstrated best by the emergence of the rock star persona. The previous transit of Pluto through Leo, albeit undiscovered at the time, was in the 1690s and early 1700s, when John Locke wrote his essays on how governments only existed by voluntary agreements, and that their first function was to protect the rights of individuals. The 20th century Pluto in Leo generation seems to have taken this message to heart. This generation is the first of the recent me generations, and it opened doors into self-development that are still being explored to this day. It is truly the first of the youth cultures that exist routinely today. To quote the astrologer Bob Marks, Pluto in Leo will always defy authority, unless, of course, they are that authority. From The Law of Pluto, Reshaping the Void, by me, available in all good bookshops worldwide, October the 10th onwards. Although, if you want a signed copy, drop me an email.